afternoon, everyone. I think we've reached the afternoon point of the day. So I am going to do two things in a very short period of time. The first of which is in my capacity as chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of the way we are approaching the regulatory mission that we need to execute as part of being engaged in everything else you've heard about this morning. And the second thing is a trust exercise between me and Third Way. They have asked me to try to synthesize what are key thoughts that were provoked as I sat here today and took some copious notes. I took some careful quotes from other speakers, and so I will state that these are my takeaways. This is what resonated with me, so this is not attributable to Third Way, and because this panel ran straight through, they haven't even seen or don't know what I'm about to talk about. So first of all, again, I am really pleased to be here and thrilled to have these two missions to me to talk to you about. First of all, the NRC's regulatory engagement. And it's very interesting to me, as Josh Freed welcomed us all this morning to the summit, as a broad charge to everyone, he talked about innovation, but not just innovation of technology, innovating in three different capacities. And I think this is certainly true of the advanced reactor space, but might be true of the nuclear enterprise very, very broadly. He says we innovate not just the technology itself, but we innovate the policies, the ways of doing business, and the processes for engaging with each other and with broader communities of interest. And those are the three tiers of engagement. When I thought about that, I think that there's a good correlation between those three types of innovations and where NRC has set its focus and priorities. So let me explain that to you. Now, a lot of you in the audience follow Advanced Reactors Day today even more closely than I do, so you're aware that NRC has published a vision and a strategy, and I think at a high level that's very, very helpful. But I think more relevant to today's discussion is that vision and strategy is supported by a set of implementation action plans, and those are divided into the near term, the midterm, and the long term. The near term is what I'm going to talk about right now, and that is net from today to going out about 5 years from today. For your information, mid is 5 to 10 years, and long term is 10 years and beyond. So we have basically 6 near-term items that we're very focused on. You can call them strategies, you can call them goals or objectives. I think of them as objectives or goals because we are trying to move somewhere and make progress towards something. The first two, I think, are very related. The first one is to acquire and develop sufficient knowledge, competency, and capacity to perform regulatory reviews of non-light water reactor technologies. And the second is acquire or develop computer codes and analytical tools for this same work. So again, what we do are safety and security determinations on this technology. So in order to do that, we need to have both the human resource, we need to have trained individuals on these non-light water reactor technologies. We also need codes and analytical tools because we'll be doing a lot of analysis that will verify what's presented to us in terms of a safety demonstration. The third of our near-term goals and objectives is to develop guidance for a flexible regulatory review process that can be conducted within the bounds of the existing regulations, but that could use the use of conceptual design reviews or other phased or staged licensing process, which is not the way we've been approaching recent, and by recent I mean the last couple of decades, our reviews of large light water reactor technologies. We've not had a need to do staged or phased licensing engagement. And I view this, this is a near-term goal. It's certainly been communicated to us as a priority of the advanced reactor vendor community. I think we're hearing clearly that having a staged and phased engagement with the regulator is a preference. It might be a business imperative, quite frankly, for them. And so we've heard that, and we are responding accordingly. The NRC staff has developed and designed something they call regulatory engagement plans, I think is the term. That sounds a little bit like a courtship, but it's meant to be something that can be tailored and stylized to an individual vendor so that there can be a kind of understanding between the vendor and the NRC. What are you going to bring in, be it a topical report, a white paper? When do you think you're going to bring it in? What are we going to give you feedback on when we get that thing? So I think it's a very adaptive way. It's within existing law. It's consistent with our current regulations. But I do take heart of Senator Whitehouse's comment in his video that the current framework is not efficient. It is not the most effective way to structure a review of these new technologies. So the fourth is to facilitate industry codes and standards needed to support non-light water reactor lifestyle, and that includes fuels and innovative materials types. Again, this is an area that I'm a little bit geeky about on industry codes and standards, and I could go on about that at some length. I think there are 2.5 people in the room that would care, and Mark Peters is one of them, and other lab people who are. But if you've visited our national labs and seen the work they're doing just on examining materials, new alloys, new materials, so that we can have industry codes that reflect the performance of those new materials. If you want to come into your regulator and prove that something is safe, one of the first things we're going to want to know is you built it out of material X, you think it behaves one way, how much do we know about how it actually behaves under high temperature, high pressure, those types of environments. So that is something that I know is very geeky and very boring, and it's a great way when I've been privileged to meet with senators or congressmen that care about advanced nuclear and they want to talk about, well, what are specific things? You start talking about industry codes and standards development, and it's a great way to have a short conversation with them. They're quickly on to their next meeting. So our fifth high priority area in the near term is to identify and resolve technology-inclusive policy issues that will impact these advanced reactor reviews that include siting, permitting, and licensing. Technology inclusive in that statement is really, really important. And I think you've heard that throughout the day today. What we're trying to do is take a policy manifestation and solve it kind of one time for all technologies, have a solution or approach to it that is robust enough to encompass the very divergent advanced reactor technologies that are out there and will possibly come our way. Just a quick example is modularity, and that's not even in advanced reactor space, that's in SMR space. Modularity is not really accommodated in the current regulatory framework. What you find when you go to apply something is you find out, surprisingly, it was written to be coherent with the technology that you are licensing and, right now, which is large light water reactors. And those get licensed, constructed, and they come into operation as one thing, not as a phased set of modules that come online one by one. So for something like modularity, what we want to do in a technology inclusive way is to look at any disconnects or misalignments between the current framework and modularity, figure out what those are, articulate them, advance our staff will advance to the commission any policy decisions that need to be made, modifications, adjustments, how are we going to approach that? And you shouldn't need to do that for every type of SMR technology. You want to do it in a rigorous way that basically aligns the policy with modularity, one and done. That's the goal. And then the sixth and final near-term goal and objective that we have is to develop and implement a structured, integrated strategy that engages all the communities of interest that are impacted by this on all the things I just talked about. So I think that clearly aligns with Josh's comment. He began the day today, so let me put on my hat of sharing with you the things that the messages and going forward thoughts that I have pulled out of today's conversation. Josh said there was one thing, if we take away one thing today, we should take away that nuclear power does not and cannot exist on an island. So anytime someone tells you, if you take away one thing, this is the thing. So I wrote that down. That was very, very clear. Now, I thought about with takeaways that human nature is that the two takeaways that in 5 years I will remember for today are that Mark Peters said that he is a fan of small modular. My margin note is shocking. So that is very shocking that the director of the Idaho National Lab is a fan of small modular. The other thing is human nature to have as a takeaway is that if Mayor Casper cannot be found by anyone in Idaho Falls, she ran off and joined Third Way. So that's the other thing we remember. But I think that what the organizers would like me to bring to you are some of the broader themes. I did find it really interesting that Mark Peters did say, we need to leapfrog back into leadership as a country, and I thought that that was a very, very blunt statement, and I think we heard that theme continued. We heard our colleague from Ghana state that, you know, there are a lot of quarters who court countries in the development of their program, and that the U.S. is, you know, could be doing more, and when it's not present, its absence is noted. So I found that an interesting theme today. Senator Bennett, I thought, spoke very frankly, and I have to be honest, anything said about the regulatory construct was, my ears perked up. But after a riveting discussion of 1 or 2 T's on Bennett, there were very important insights that were gained. In all seriousness, that the senator said, I don't want to see what happened to our solar production industry happen to Advanced Nuclear, and by that he meant that it was a kind of made in America thing that eventually became something that we forget was made in America, and I will have to Google whether or not Colorado invented renewable energy or solar energy, but we'll say. But he did say it will take changes in our regulatory processes, and what's interesting is that on Mika's panel, she framed a question about whether or not the regulatory, actually she didn't ask it as a question. Her predicate to the question was, the regulatory system is outdated. And I think I want to respectfully challenge that by stating that the regulatory system, where it has detail, it is oriented towards large light water reactors. Guess what we operate in the United States? Large light water reactors. And I think that if your national regulator had spent a lot of time and money developing a regulatory framework for molten salt reactors over the last 30 years, I think a lot of people, maybe not the people in this room who likely have an affinity for technology broadly, a lot of people would have questioned that. I think that the basic safety and security determinations, and Laura talked about this a little bit, the basics are there and they're unchanging. You know, is it going to harm public health and safety? Can it be operated safely? Does the operator understand the parameters of its operation? Can it be defended in a threat environment that is unfortunately changing very dynamically? These questions aren't different, but I do agree with I think both senators who said that the regulatory framework is not prepared right now, today, to evaluate these things with the greatest efficiency. This isn't a large light water framework to which you take dozens of exemptions and you have to document all of that, and we would. Is that the most efficient way to proceed? So the 6 elements that I've described to you in the near term are NRC's articulation of the scope of things we need to do. And what I observe about NRC, and I know our commission is very pledged to have a very open engagement with this community, with others who do not advance nuclear as a solution to problems, all constituencies really, and to engage that. And as we go along, we're going to learn, and I think that the one thing to be comforted by the regulatory framework is NRC is nothing if it's not earnest. Sometimes it is painfully earnest, but we will engage very openly, and we are open to feedback. Of the 6 elements, we've been told from the community that elements 3 and 5 are the most important. 3 is a flexible regulatory review that might be staged or phased, and 5 is getting an approach to those policy issues that are novel and will be manifesting themselves. Let's get those things done. So I think that that's there's a lot more that we agree about. Who talked about there's a 75% agreement? That might have been Senator Bennett. He said, if you can have a rational conversation, there is generally 85%, I think it was 85% of people will find some common ground about what's important, what do we need to do. And I did appreciate in the last panel that, a community, Elizabeth stated that although her organization does not advance nuclear as a solution, that across the clean energy technology suite, there's a common opportunity there. And so, we heard that there on tax policy and other things, if there could be a better working together as a community, we would be able to maybe build on that as a foundation that, again, people can have their points of departure with each other. The investment community was interesting to me. It's not really my wheelhouse, but it's interesting. They talked about finding opportunities within nuclear that philanthropy could uniquely de-risk. These are new words that I'm learning here. And when Rachel was asked if she shared that optimism, she said, there's a tiny glimmer of hope. So people, I think, in terms of their enthusiasm and their view of the challenges, she also noted that the time horizons and the risk levels in nuclear make that investment piece is tricky, and building the confidence to have folks engage that. Rachel also had the point that this is a technology, if we need to remind ourselves that its whole origin story is in government control, government relationship, and so to now take the mechanisms of government and say, I want to engage a venture capital, high-tech kind of a mindset, a Silicon Valley incubator kind of a thought process. Rachel challenged us, and I took this challenge to say, the instruments of government must operate fundamentally differently in order for that to happen. And so I think we heard a lot of different perspectives, but I think there is some centrality of theme. A personal takeaway, and I might have people in the room who don't agree with this, but I heard the investment community as well say it's really hard to go to someone and get their confidence raised about something where we can't really point to anything or show them anything. And this was interesting to hear people talk around the margins of what I interpret to say, does there need to be some agreement on advancing a smaller set of opportunities and having success on those, and then maybe using that as a boomerang back to have a kind of a rising tide lifts all boats. And so there wasn't a lot of discussion today about prototypes and demonstration projects, and I think maybe Third Way has done other events that are more central on that. But for talking about investment, talking about communities, talking about innovation, I think that there was a lot more things that were shared in common with folks than there were things that people really disagreeing on the priorities and the opportunities. And I did think it was very pleasing to have Ghana here. I think any number of countries could have stood in and given a very similar narrative to what our colleague from Ghana talked about, and Amy's comment on that same panel, that we take for granted exporting U.S. safety culture, which is, of course, something very near and dear to me, Laura said, and security culture is another thing, that when you export, when the U.S. has a presence globally in nuclear, those are two things that we sometimes forget are part of what we export and very, very valuable. And Amy had mentioned that, we can't take the nuclear safety culture as a U.S. export for granted, and that is something that you would want to have embedded in the culture of a country that was moving forward. And our ability, as Laura points out, to influence that early is a significant part of the U.S. benefit that comes from being active in this space. So I think, again, to kind of come back all the way around to where Josh began the day, when Erin said in her work for Third Way on advanced nuclear, it used to be advanced nuclear and carbon capture, she said what they found is it's useful to work with other technologies to get their advanced nuclear objectives across the finish line. And she used tax policy as her example. But when I reflected on that, I thought that takes us all the way back to Josh's comment, which was nuclear power does not and cannot exist on its own island. So I think that is a very key takeaway, and I thank you all for your attention, and I thank Third Way for their trust that I would try to hit some of the high points here, but thank you all again.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and we may just invite you to close up all of our events at this point, because we certainly couldn't have done it any better ourselves. Thank you all very much for joining us today. I think amongst all the panels and speakers, we really did capture the idea that there is a community that all of you have created in advanced nuclear, and that there are other communities with clean energy technology, with local potential host communities, the international community, both countries that are interested in advanced nuclear, and security and nonproliferation experts and investors that want to be engaged and are already talking to each other. And our hope really is that you take away from this the opportunity to engage beyond, whether it is the nuclear community you're working in or whatever you focus on day to day, and reach out to others and start working across sectors and across ideas to help us with our common goal of advancing advanced nuclear in the United States and globally. We are hosting lunch for everyone to help further the conversation. as soon as I conclude, so I will be very quick. But one thing I did want to take the opportunity to also point out is Susie Baker, who is sitting there in the corner. Please stand up. This is all her concept. And just did an absolutely phenomenal job from the design to panelists to execution. And we absolutely, this is her vision, and a real round of applause for her. Thank you. And lunch will be right through the doors. So thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to talking to all of you.